from LBC now. Sorry, Ben, I know that you're asking a question, but the audio here in our press conference room isn't picking up what you're saying. I don't know if there's a technical problem.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Ben. Sorry.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Gove, everybody watching this will be wondering the same thing. That is how and when this lockdown will end. You said before, understandably, it's too early to say when. But I wondered if you could help us with the how. Professor Powers just said there, it's almost too early to say what the exit strategy will be. Can you reassure people, because that will worry them, that the government does have a plan, an exit strategy, as it were, to lift this lockdown while also containing the virus? And just specifically, a couple of very quick questions to Professor Powers. Firstly, it's been said a lot that some of the experts advising the government believe that herd immunity, while not the strategy, is ultimately inevitable, that we simply won't be able to stop most people in this country getting coronavirus. All we can do is spread that out to ease the burden on the NHS. Can you level with people today and say that is the case, that most of us will get this at some point, or do you believe that not to be the case? And very specifically, there's been some early evidence from other countries that treating coronavirus patients with blood plasma with antibodies, or people who have recovered from the illness, can have a significant benefit. Is that something the NHS is looking at, and will you be asking people who've recovered to donate blood? Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. On your specific point about when the current restrictions will end, it depends on compliance. I mean, one of the points Neil Ferguson was making earlier today, one of the points that Steve and I have been seeking to make today as well, is that the more effectively people comply with what we acknowledge are very stringent conditions, the more that we can slow the spread of the disease, the more resilient the NHS can be, the more that we can move to a different phase in due course. But it does rely on people observing that. So there's no fixed point, no specific date in the calendar at which we can say that things will change. We're keeping them under review. The Prime Minister said that the current lockdown proposals will be reviewed in what is just over a week's time. But we need people to comply now. The other thing that I would say is that, as Steve I'm sure will say more about, we're dealing with a wholly new virus. We're dealing with a new virus whose spread and whose capacity to cause death are unlike those that we've seen specifically before, and therefore we need to be certain that in every area where we can fight this virus, we are improving our capacity and making sure that we have the flexibility needed as we move to a different phase to have all the tools ready in order to fight it. And those tools will include, of course, not just some of the treatments which are undergoing clinical trial at the moment, but also some of the vaccines that we're seeking to collaborate with other countries to develop worldwide, and also making sure that the NHS itself has the resilience required to deal with more cases in the future. Steve?
Yes, so I don't particularly like the term exit strategy. I think we should think much more of how we are going to manage this virus over the next months, because it is very likely that this virus will become established in populations throughout the world. And so we need a strategy to manage this over time, not just in the next few weeks or the next few months. And as I said earlier, all countries will be thinking and working together on what that strategy must be. Secondly, as Michael has said, and I've said, scientific knowledge about this virus is still being discovered. We're still in the early stages. And as we learn more about it, as the scientific evidence builds, then that will allow those strategies to evolve. So immunity is one part of a viral infection and an epidemic, but it's not the only part of it. As you've just heard, successful drug approaches, and we are recruiting people into clinical trials, the use of vaccines are all important parts of strategies to manage any infection. And as we learn more about effective drug treatments, as we see vaccines coming up in the future, they are all important components of how in totality you manage an infection. And if we look back at past infections, so if you go back 40 years ago to HIV and AIDS, a different sort of infection coming into the population, but over time strategies were developed to manage that infection. So we can manage infections through various strategies, of which immunity is one part. And I should say, as I've said before, one of the important things when it comes to immunity that we still need to learn, because it is too early in this epidemic and pandemic to learn this, is what sort of immunity is generated in people, how long that immunity lasts. And that will all be important information as we develop strategies in the months to come.
Thank you very much, Steve. Anything more you wanted to ask me, Ben?
Could I just come back on that specific point? Talk about the managing the illness. The question was about whether you therefore expect most people to get it. I'd be grateful if you could just say a little more, if we're managing it rather than stopping it, is it the case that at some point most people in the UK will get this virus?
Because it depends upon all those things that I've talked about. So it depends upon effective drug treatments. It depends upon effective vaccine strategies. So it's not trying to avoid the question at all. It's simply to say that we are too early on in a virus that 3 months ago we knew nothing about, didn't know was in the human population, to answer those questions. So I don't want anybody to get the impression this is the avoidance of questions. This is the reality of learning about a new virus and a new disease.
Thank you very much, Steve. We'll turn now to David Wooding, from the Sun on Sunday. David.
Good afternoon. We've had some reports